Hey everybody, Tom Barnes, stories from the 78, a little outside the footprint of the 78 in Oak Park. And that's where my friend Rebecca Keller, that's where she lives. And she has written her debut novel, which is very fancy schmancy. I think it's wonderful that you're doing that, Rebecca. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm great, actually. It's springtime.
It is, and it kind of feels like springtime today. So we're going to take that as a win, right?
Right, exactly.
So you came out with this book, and the book is called "You Should Have Known," but it's not your
Yes,
first book. You've been in the art field for years, and you've done a lot of nonfiction artwork
right.
in that field, right? So this isn't your first foray into writing per se.
No, no, I've spent a lot of time. I used to work at the Museum of Contemporary Art years ago and did a lot of writing for them. And now I teach at the School of the Art Institute. So I do a lot of writing as part of my artwork and also write a lot about art and about my students and my collaborations. So it's not writing, putting words on paper is not new to me, but fiction is a whole completely other animal. And
Yeah,
that's
I bet.
relatively new.
Yeah, I mean, it was that terrifying to do just because it was so. I mean, I imagine it's very different writing about in the way you have to write about art for a classroom setting and stuff like that versus a novel where you can kind of
Yes.
do whatever you want, right?
Right, if you can do it. I mean,
Yeah, yeah. It's a
yeah,
big effort. Yeah.
it takes a lot. I mean, you have to think about structure and it's not, I mean, obviously when you're writing about art, you also want the prose to be accessible and interesting and well crafted, but uh, a novel, you have to both come up with the story and also come up with the structure and the characters and the pacing and all of that. And it's just, and it takes a long time, because you're not describing something that's out in the real world. I mean, out in the real world. And yeah, it was not easy. It was a little bit, I don't know if terrifying is the word, but a big lift, an uphill pull.
Well, I think that's why people refer to bucket lists as I want to write my great American novel, because I think it's a monumental task for anybody to do. I hope to get there one day. So every time I talk to somebody who's done it for the first time, it gives me hope and inspiration.
Yes.
Um, I imagine though, being from Minnesota originally, and you are in Chicago now, and you have been for probably longer than you were in Minnesota. So like you're a
Yes.
Chicagoan. That's how most of
Yes.
Chicago is if you weren't born here, right? But did you take your what you've learned as a teacher or as a historian art or as a student of living in Chicago and translate that into You Should Have Known, your novel?
Yes, because it is set outside, just outside, it's set outside the city.
Mhm.
I kind of struggled. The setting is really important. It's set in an assisted living, a retirement apartment. And I wanted her to be, and there's a kind of a thread in which her daughter maybe is considering moving to the big city.
Mhm.
And so it was important that it was connected to Chicago, but it was far enough away, like it's a distant suburb, put it that way, a fictional distant
Sure.
suburb, but far enough away so that it could be realistic that it was a relatively small town. So I've said it about, I don't know, 30 miles outside the city. So, an outer ring suburb in which, you know, um, but still very much connected to the city and where her
Yeah.
family is still connected to the city.
Yeah, kind of like a new Lenox if you're from the south side of Chicago. That's a burb
Yeah,
that's kind of out there on the outskirts. We can still take the train to get in the city type thing.
exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. That's exactly right.
and how in the process of the writing the book, what was the most challenging thing that you faced, given that it's something a little bit different for you?
Well, I wanted to, let me tell you a little bit about the book and then I can
Yeah,
describe it.
sure.
So I wanted to write a kind of a morally complicated story. I wanted to write a story about someone who normally would never consider doing something really, really wrong, and that kind of
Uh-huh.
steps out the straight and narrow, inspired by fury at a kind of and a desire for revenge, which I suppose you could frame as a very Chicago thing.
Yeah,
She
it's in our DNA, right?
yeah, maybe. She's a retired nurse. Her name's Franny, and she moves into an assisted living, a retirement apartment, and forms a new friendship. And shortly after she becomes friends with this woman named Catherine, she realizes that Catherine's husband is the corrupt judge. So again, we have another connection.
Yeah,
Is a
that's very
corrupt judge
Chicago.
who she blames for who was responsible for the death of her granddaughter, and the breaking of the near breaking of her family. So once she realizes who this person is and that he got away with it, and he's very vain, he's very pompous, she's just infuriated. And she's a retired nurse with a pretty strong medical background. And so what she does from there is what forms kind of the basis of the book. She steps outside her, her moral compass breaks for a minute. She gives in to one of her worst impulses, but the wrong person, somebody dies, and how this all happened and what happened. She realizes that what she thought happened that night maybe didn't happen that night. And so she then becomes kind of a sleuth to figure out
I see.
what happened, who killed who, how did this all unfold. And in the process, she uncovers a crime no one suspected. So it's a very, one of the critics said this plot winds and coils like a spring. So there's a mystery within a mystery, but it's really focused on her family tragedy, and it's very driven by her character.
And I imagine putting all that together and having it make sense for you to then translate it on paper or pen or on a computer is probably difficult, just because I mean that sounds like it would be difficult to try to keep it all straight, because anytime you watch any of these things, like a show on Netflix or what have you, that talks about that, you're like, how did they even think of that? But I imagine it's a story that you probably had in your head for some time, maybe, that you were just kind of always picking at, and I'll get to it, and finally that opportunity presented itself. Or was this just, I'm doing it and this is what I'm doing?
Well, I didn't have this story in my head for a long time. I had kind of a half notion. I wrote a short story, and I mean very short, like 1,000 words, a few years back, and the germ of it was in there. It was about revenge. What can you justify somebody who normally would consider themselves a normal good person? At what situation would tempt somebody to do do something really bad? Mm-hmm. And what happened is my mother moved into an assisted living facility. And I realized that in a place like that, that's a great, there's a reason that so many mysteries are set, to your point, are set in closed settings, because everybody knows everybody, emotions become amplified. And I thought in a place like that, that's why I ended up having to move it to a smaller town. In a place like that, everybody might have history with one another. Mm-hmm. But maybe they remember their history, maybe they don't. so the setting became really critical in figuring out how to keep all the parts in motion. But to your larger point about having to remember it all, it's anybody who writes something like that, especially a mystery where the parts have to line up in a believable way, or the whole story falls apart. It's tricky. And there were days when I was like, wait, so-and-so has to be at this place at this time. So how can I make that happen?
Is there a way people can follow you or find any more information about you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm on social media, Facebook and Instagram and stuff, although I'm a little bit, like most people, I think it drives us it's necessary and both drives us crazy.
Yep.
Um, and my website is RebeccaAKeller.com, and I also have a Substack, newsletter that's free and that kind of keeps people updated on myself as a writer, but also other writers and things going on around town that I find interesting. Sort of, art and writing.
Fantastic. It's been a pleasure talking with you today,
Thank
and
you
I
so
appreciate the
much.
time.
Thank you so much. I love stories from the 78.
Thank you. I
It's really
appreciate
fun.
it. Yeah, I try to do a little bit of everything, right?
It's great. It's really great.
Well, it's only great because people like you agree to talk with me, and I can help tell your story. So thank you.
My pleasure. Take care.